finish your drink when this falls off the back of the chair. Hi, I'm Ian. Around here, I talk about books because I love to yap. And this is my first year-end wrap-up. In 2024, I read 70 books, which is a personal record, and I will literally never do that ever again. I read 25 books from the literary fiction genre, which was followed up by 13 horror books and 10 fantasy books, which is really surprising. My highest rated genre was memoir with 4 stars on average. That was followed by historical fiction with 3.91 stars, and then literary fiction with 3.88 star average. But I was also surprised to find that I really like romance. I didn't read a lot compared to these other genres that I just mentioned, but romance was a 3.9 average for me, which is really weird. I might explore that in 2025, along with sports. I only read 2 sports books. One of them was Beartown, and the other one was Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I averaged among the two a 4.5 star rating. So there might be something there. The biggest book I read was The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt, which was 665 pages, and the shortest book I read was the epistolary memoir 84 Charing Cross Road, which was 97 pages. And this is not counting poetry. In June and July, I read 1 book each. That's the least amount of books that I read in any given month, and in November, I read 12 books, which is kind of an insane amount. Someone was definitely avoiding reality. But in total, I read almost 20,000 pages. I think it was like 19,300 something. But this video is focused on my top 10 and a couple of honorable mentions in the poetry category. My top 10 has 2 authors that are children of immigrants, 4 authors of color, 3 women or femme authors, 3 books are written by self-identifying queers, 8 books on my top 10 feature queer main characters. 5 of the books on my top 10 feature main characters of color. There is 1 translated work, 1 sci-fi book, 1 fantasy book, 2 historical fiction books, 1 nonfiction, and 2 books by the same author. So without further ado, let's get into my top 10 books that I read in 2024. And to start off, we have Stay True, a memoir by Hua Xu. So this is written by a photographer. This won the Pulitzer Prize, I think in 2023. This is a measured account based on Hua Xu's journal entries from his years in college, back when his best friend was tragically unalived during a random carjacking incident. This memoir kind of focuses on the minutia of friendship, and that minutia accumulates to become kind of like chosen family. There's also an intense focus on music and culture, like in the mid-90s, and this takes place in Berkeley, California, a really interesting location and era. So there's a lot of rich world building. And the friendship, including the grieving process, is portrayed with a minimalism that hints that the author is still kind of processing this death, and that he may never be done doing so. This is subtly powerful. At number 9 is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. This is queer Harry Potter with vampires. Honestly, it's a great popcorn read. This is about Simon, who is closely under the tutelage of the head of the magic school that he's at, and this person is known as the Mage. And Simon is believed to be the most powerful wizard, like the chosen one. He's here to save the world from this dark magical creature who is wreaking havoc on the magical community. Meanwhile, he's also navigating a complicated relationship with his girlfriend and a strong, almost obsessive desire for the return of his missing roommate, who is also a vampire, named Baz. This is a brisk reimagining of Harry Potter, like fan fiction. It's the first in a series. I'm looking forward to continuing on with the series. I loved the relationships in this. They are complex, even more so when you add in the process of discovering your own sexuality. I liked the magic system. It's based on the power of words and their meaning both apart from and part of the intention behind them. And I hear the series just keeps getting better. So I'm excited to continue with this. This is probably my most fun one on the list, if I'm being honest. At number 8, What Belongs to You by Garth Greenwell. It took me almost 2 years to read this, but I was floored when I finished it. I began reading this in Mexico in 2022, and I actually finished it on a plane to New Zealand in 2024. This is about this strange fixation that this American English teacher in Bulgaria has with a sex worker named Mitko. And the book is told in 3 parts. Book 1 is when the main character meets and starts to fall in love and kind of become obsessed with Mitko. The second part is the main character in Alabama in their youth and adolescence and navigating their sexuality in a really conservative culture and family. Third, after the main character has moved on from Mitko, we see Mitko's return and their interaction. I think Greenwell actually balances intellectualism and spice extremely well, but in a really peculiar way. And I do think that his signature style is highly representative of the trauma kind of inherent in marginalized people's sexuality, because there's that tiny voice that stems from bigots and bigotry in a queer person's mind especially that says, you're a deviant, you're a deviant. And I think everyone can identify with being in love with someone who's incapable of loving you back. So this book is universal, at least in that way. However, this is dreary. It is very contemplative. It's the kind of book that I don't feel like I can suggest to everyone, because it also feels like an intellectualization of the author's feelings, which can also be a form of avoidance. Regardless, I loved this. At number 7, didn't nobody give a shit about what happened to Carlotta? Didn't nobody give a shit what happened to Carlotta? That's the one. This is by James Hannaham. This is literary fiction. It's written in the vernacular, it has no quotation marks, and the style is a very stream of consciousness. So we follow Carlotta, who is a woman who transitioned during her time in prison. She was wrongly convicted of being involved in a fatal robbery, but the book takes place in the first day of her parole. We see her interact with her family, and a lot of them are greeting her as a woman for the very first time. Carlotta herself is wowed by how grown her son is, how much New York City has changed and been gentrified, and also how hard the system is working against her. We can see how prison puts someone in a permanent state of mind of survival mode. But the best part about Carlotta is that she's wholly human. She rolls with the punches. Sometimes she has to fight off the urge to throw some herself. At turns, she wants to give up, and then she counters with that signature perseverance. All of this in the face of uncertainty. Will her family accept her? Will her son accept her? Will she be able to get a job? Will she literally be able to stay out of trouble? All of that is in question, while at the same time, she's freaking hilarious. I can highly suggest the audiobook along with reading this, and that's really helpful because of how unique the writing style is. But this is truly an amazing work of character. At number 6, Cleanness by Garth Greenwell. So this is the author that is on here twice. I have no idea if you can see that. So I read Cleanness on a train that I decided to randomly take so I could read. I love traveling, and apparently I read Garth Greenwell while traveling. That's a thing now. This is one spicy book. This actually follows the same character that's in What Belongs to You. But this time, this is more a collection of vignettes. They're not really short stories, but almost. The love interest Miko actually shows up in one of these vignettes, and we also see the main character struggle with being a teacher, especially as a gay man in a country that is pretty hostile to homosexuals. There is one very spicy vignette in this that you need to be aware of and be ready. This is XXX level spice, so if you don't like that, you should not pick this up. If you are into that, just beware that it will pop up. Other themes also is like the ethics of being a teacher and a mentor to college-age students. Ultimately though, Greenwell doesn't really judge his character much, and at times this sort of feels like autofiction, as if Greenwell is examining kind of his own mistakes that he's made and contemplating that and trying not to put it through a punitive lens. I feel really close to this character now, and I would love more stories about him, though I don't think we're gonna get any more. But just again, like, beware of that. So I cannot express to you how spicy that one vignette is, so I just be ready. This was also a year that I read some really great poetry, so I have 2 runners up. I am kind of cheating here. I guess you could say that this is a top 12, but here are 2 poetry books that I absolutely loved. The first one is by Jen Campbell, who is a booktuber herself. This is a collection of poems called Please Do Not Touch This Exhibit, and these poems are a damning and raw expression of emotion, specifically of this somatic trauma that the author has endured. She mixes the body with this metaphor of like a house or a building. I think it might be a hospital. I read this a long time ago, forgive me. And she mixes that into a metaphor for place and time and feeling, both physical and emotional. This was truly incredible. And especially if you need some disability rep in your reading, if you are lacking in that, it is a perspective that is really important to have. And this is one of the most powerful pieces from a disabled perspective that I've ever read in my life. Second runner-up is Instructions for Traveling West by Joy Sullivan. This is one of the most digestible set of poems I have ever read. The poems range from recounting childhood memories to the panini and the author's romantic relationships, and also just the challenge of writing. And even though this author has actually led a life that is unlike any other, there is a universality to almost every single poem in here. And that's because Joy Sullivan knows how to get to the humanity that is behind her experiences using both this natural and inner world building that comes out in the words she's chosen. It's fantastic. So those 2 poetry books are runners up, if you're into poetry or you want quicker reads, there's no wrong way to read poetry. So do not tell yourself that you don't read poetry because you're XYZ this or that. No wrong way to do it. Go grab some. It's great. Okay, now on to the second half of my top 10. At number 5 is James by Percival Everett. This is the second Percival Everett book that I have read. I read The Trees. That was a 5-star rating for me. Guess what this was? This is historical fiction. It won the National Book Award, and it is a sort of refocusing of Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, because it is told from the perspective of Jim, or James, from the original story. So Jim is a slave who code switches between sounding like the type of person that Mark Twain wrote him as, and then the educated, highly intelligent, and eloquent individual that he is around his family and friends and other slaves. So I've never actually read Huckleberry Finn, but I was the stage manager for the musical Big River, which is based on the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, so I actually know the story quite well. And this book maintains that quintessentially American adventure story, but this time it's not hiding behind whiteness to tell it. The audiobook was absolutely fantastic. I used it to do immersive reading, and this book touches all of the emotional bases. It's funny, it's sad, it's fun. At times, it's even scary. I loved it. At number 4, my most recent read on the list, Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This is the first book in a trilogy, and it's about a hockey team in a small town called Beartown. This hockey team is about to go to national semifinals, and the whole town's persona and hopes and dreams and future relies on this team winning the whole damn thing. Because it means that more people will want to send their kids to the school here to be on the hockey team, which means more funding, which means more tourism, which means that this dying town will be saved and revived. But halfway through the book, there is an incident involving the star hockey player and the daughter of the hockey team coach. And what happens after that tears the whole community apart. So this is a book in which the main character is the community. And Bachman takes his skills of easily building characters on a more superficial level and uses them to create Beartown as this community, as something that moves in unison and then overnight totally fractures. And when that fracture takes place, the real humanity behind all these characters really begins to shine. And each character surprises you in how they react to this incident. I'm really excited to read the next book. I think it's called Us Against Them. I think that's it. And for those of you that are wondering, there is a minor character in this who is gay. They are not stereotyped, and I actually really loved that character. It was a really complicated character. So yeah, this was great, and queers, you are welcome to read this too. Speaking of queer books, non-binary rep, freaking love this. It's A Prayer for the Crown Shy, coming in at number 3. This is by Becky Chambers. It is the second book in the Monk and Robot duology. I gave the first book, A Psalm for the Wild-Built, I think 4.5 stars. So in this, we come back to Moscap the robot and Dex the T-Monk as they head from the wilderness back into civilization so that Moscap can accomplish their goal of understanding what it is that humans truly need. I love these characters so much. I love Moscap's sort of nagging curiosity. I love how kind of guarded and protected and private Dex can be in between moments of vulnerability. And I just like how these are an unlikely pair, these two friends. But when Moscap meets Dex's family, my heart melted. It's a beautiful moment, and it had me tearing up. Not to mention, there's a sequence in which Dex is describing to Moscap the economy that exists in this sci-fi novel, and it's not boring. That economic system truly warmed my heart, and I was like, what are we even doing with capitalism? Like, why can't we do that? So this is just a really sweet story, and it totally replenished my soul in the month of November, if you know what I mean. Coming in at number 2, Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. This is literary fiction with some elements of magical realism, and it is about Cyrus Shams. He is a young Iranian American who becomes obsessed with martyrdom as a sort of artistic concept. His mother died when he was a baby. She was on a plane to the US from Iran, and the plane was shot down accidentally, this is based on real events, accidentally by a US warship. He and his father end up moving to the US when Cyrus is still really young. Cyrus graduates, goes off to college, and then suddenly his father dies. He's struggling with addiction and alcoholism and is a recovering addict. And he seems like particularly blind to love, like the people who love him in his life, or like at least avoidant. But I loved the humor in this book. I know I made it sound super dark, but this is actually a very humorous book. Dark humor, obviously. There's a chapter where Cyrus is imagining Lisa Simpson Rosen and the basketball player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar having a conversation about Cyrus and his family. I also love these anecdotes that Cyrus has about his job where he literally plays a patient who is dying for med students in med school. And then also this complicated relationship or friendship that he has with a close friend of his, which really brings into question complexities of just like queerness and sexuality for Cyrus. But you gotta know that the end is a wallop. It's going to leave you wondering. It's going to leave you having to make your own decisions about what it means and what you believe has happened. It's insane to think that this is a debut. Speaking of debuts, my number one is a debut. My favorite book in 2024, drumroll please, In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. This is historical literary fiction. It's about two boarding school boys who enlist in the British Army to fight in World War I. We follow them from their kind of complicated juvenile relationship in boarding school to these really grim realities in the trenches in France. And then the impossible feats that they have to overcome in order to survive and get back to each other. I love the multifaceted portrayal of queerness in this and the nuances of how people understood queerness in this time. Like, there isn't rampant homophobia or overt homophobia, but there isn't necessarily like outright acceptance. Not to mention there's so much beautiful poetry in this book. And I really did love the ending. It gives a little to the reader, but also feels realistic at the same time. And that's it. I'd love to know if any of these books have made it into your TBR for 2025. Thanks for hanging out. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment, subscribe so we can keep talking about books. I will see you next time, and happy reading.